I see it is you've got two choices. You can either keep pretending like nothing bad's ever gonna happen to you, and then when it does, you're saying, uh-oh, or you can get ahead of what's coming so that when it does, not if, you're ready for it. And you're sitting pretty, sipping on Mai Tais next to the pool, working on that Caribbean suntan, because you got it covered. So folks, it's time for you to learn the truth about money. It's time for you to take back control of your money so that you are ready for what's about to happen. By doing that, you're setting yourself up for absolute success. No matter what comes your way, you're ready for it. And that's what I want for you, and I want to help you with that. So go to chrisnaugle.com and sign up for the Wealth Webinar. We do them every Wednesday at 1 p.m., and you need to be there because it's time.
For over 90 years, we've been crash testing our cars in the tireless pursuit of automotive safety. At Volvo, safety's been first since 1927. We've saved millions of lives with the invention of the three-point seatbelt in 1959. At Volvo, we've made driving safer for you and them. Visit safety.finleyvolvo.com to learn more.
So they say if you give a man a gun, he'll rob a bank. But if you give a man a bank, he'll rob everybody. The good news for you is Private Money Club runs solely on peer-to-peer relationships, which means no banks allowed. So finally, there's a community for real estate entrepreneurs where it is truly a win-win solution. This community is a place where you can connect with other lenders and other borrowers, and the end result's massive growth for you. You get to build your real estate empire, and you get to do it solving other people's problems. So if that sounds like a place you want to be, well then join us. Go to privatemoneyclub.com/Kelly. And if you want $500 off, just add the code Kelly500 and I'll knock $500 off the premier membership. We'll see you on the inside.
Welcome to the Kelly Cardenas podcast, where attitude is everything. Today's show is all about me. It's for me, because getting to spend time with this absolute genius, it's like a master class. I tell you, you better get your notebooks right now. You better get your pen and start taking notes, because this man really can change your life, and not only change your life, but change generations. Being able to spend time with him and see not only the things and the accomplishments that he has, getting his doctorate from Purdue and going on to do post-doctoral work at Caltech, to having 5 patents, to helping to his family to see a completely different side of a financial life because of the inspiration that he had watching his parents go through what they did, which we're going to cover. But also the integrity of the man, being able to see his family, the way he treats his family, the way that they love on each other, and the way that they connect is absolutely phenomenal. Very seldom do you find a person who fires on all cylinders like what Jason does. And so it's my pleasure, it's my honor to welcome my friend and Dr. Jason Henderson to the show.
Thank you, Kelly. The honor's all mine. And of all those accolades, the best one that you used was that you're a friend. Truly, I'm the recipient of just all kinds of goodness for the fact that we're friends, and thank you for that.
Well, I love this, man, because there's so many people out there that don't realize what is possible. You started from pretty humble beginnings, and you were inspired not from seeing what you wanted, but by seeing what you didn't want in your family financially. Can you talk about that and how much of that has had an impact on you to create the type of lifestyle that you have for your family?
Well, looking back on it, it's hard to say we didn't have, right? When I was in it, you don't realize that. Right? Growing up, the youngest of 9 kids, we made do, right? We had food to eat. Dad worked like a crazy man. He was always at work. We had food. We had clothes. Most of my clothes were hand-me-downs since I have 6 older brothers, and I really never got my own pair of pants. I remember painter pants?
Yes. Yes, with the little strap, that you never put the hammer that was supposed to go in there into. Yes.
Yeah, my first pair of pants that I got from the store that wasn't a hand-me-down was a pair of painter pants jeans when I was in the 7th grade. So, I don't know that I saw that I didn't want that. However, I did see what there was available, and I wanted to go after that. And I felt like, okay, Dad's made it possible for me to do good things, right? And he always taught me, go to school and get a job, right? He was poor dad in advice, yet he was rich dad in action. So I grew up with both in the same person.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a dichotomy, and I didn't really realize that until I'm a postdoc at Caltech. And my professor, who went on to win the Nobel Prize about 5 years after I left, I mean, high level guy, right? Looks at me and says, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? I'm like, ouch. Right? It just sent me for a loop. And then I started realizing I need to learn. And I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and part of the way through the book is when I had this aha moment. Wait a second. I have both in the same person. I need to do what my dad's been doing, not necessarily following his advice to get a good, education and get a good job.
So what's the difference between being rich and being wealthy?
Rich, in my opinion, is simply a figure of dollars in a bank account. Wealthy is so much beyond that. It has to do with your friends. It has to do with your family. It has to do with the culture inside your family, your relationships. I mean, I know people that are multimillionaires that don't get along with their kids. And it's like, what good is it, right? I would rather be pauper and be able to love my kids and them love me and be with people, right? So I think wealth has more to do with interpersonal relationships. It has to do with cultural capital, right? I don't appreciate things that's outside of my culture, so to speak, because I don't know, right? Well, let me give you an example. My dad, since I was youngest of 9 kids, you can imagine he was older. He was a little over 49 years old when I was born, right?
Yeah.
And so he actually fought in World War II. He was wounded in Italy in December of 1943, right? He took shrapnel in the back and laid in the hospital for a long time. And the following spring, he went into a minefield. There was a guy that had been wounded in a minefield, and he drug him out. Was awarded the Bronze Star. I have such a deep appreciation for America and what we are here for and what we have, for the fact that I have that culture, if you will, in my family. And that's valuable. So when you're saying what's the difference between rich and wealthy, wealthy has so much more to do than is simply money.
So when I watch, and especially as I've started to get into different circles throughout my life, I've been very fortunate. Came from Lompoc, California. Shout out to Lompoc. 35,000 people. We're on the map, baby. But coming from there, we didn't come up with much. And then I started getting these circles, and I started to see that honestly, it was just a couple of things, and it wasn't physical things. That was the difference between a person being wealthy, having a financial kind of freedom, and the people who didn't. So, Jason, why aren't more people wealthy in this country?
Well, when I've talked to you before, you talked about getting your heart set correct. Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest problems, is people don't have their heart set right, which comes before the mindset. I really love that you teach that. There's too many people in this country that, don't appreciate the country. They want a handout, right? That's not what... Christopher Columbus didn't come to America so we could have jobs. That's not the purpose that he left, to discover the new world, is so everybody can have a job and everybody can have free healthcare or free education, right? It was the entrepreneurial spirit that led Christopher Columbus to find America. And if we have that in our heart that, hey, this is a land of abundance, this is a land of opportunity, I think there would be more wealthy people.
What are some of the things that are the shifts? Because I hear this a lot, and say you read it in a book, and it's like, once I started to accept X or Y, then things really changed. And growing up in lack, or not with as much as what I would have liked to, I mean, we had what we needed, that statement used to piss me off. It used to get to me to a point where I'd be like, yeah, you say that's simple because now you have it. But what are some of those X's and Y's that if a person changed in their life right now, that they would start to, it's not going to be the magic beans. There's no magic beans and no silver bullet. But what are some of the things, Jason, that a person can change, maybe in the way that they look at, finances or wealth, that would literally start to change the way that their life was going?
Number one is ownership of where you're at. So there's a great book called Extreme Ownership by a Navy SEAL, right? And he talks all about that you've got to own up to where you're at, right? And once you get that and understand that where you at, particularly when you get a little bit older, maybe, 14-year-old, that's not necessarily the case, but you start to come to an age of reason and saying, you got to take 100% ownership of where you're at and what's happened in your life and realize that all of what you have right now is a result of your decisions and a result of your rejection of ideas. Sometimes when you see in other people, fame, fortune, whatever, those are ideas that you've rejected. You've rejected reaching out. You've rejected going out on a limb and asking for this or that, or going and volunteering at someone's company simply so you can be mentored by that person, right? Well, other people do it. So that's number one is X, is take 100% ownership. Number two is recognizing that your upbringing and everything is simply that. That doesn't dictate where you can go from here. Once you own where you're at, you can dictate where you go from here forward, right? And that's going to be based upon your habits, your cultures, and your education, right? The most important thing you're going to learn is that you learn after you think you know it all. The most important things I have learned came after the Ph.D., came after the postdoc. When this guy looks me in the eye and says, "You're so smart, why aren't you rich?" I mean, I had patents, I published. You can see back there. Behind me. There's the cover of Science magazine, right? We published in that. I've published in Science 3 times, and that's particularly one of our articles that, well, as at Caltech, that we published, and it was significant enough that it was highlighted on the cover. Okay, I thought it was all that in a bag of chips, right? But I wasn't. It's after you think you know everything. Then your education starts. Then you really find out the important things that will get you to go on to, where you want to be.
A thing that you just said, which I think is so interesting. We were just driving back from LA today, and it was a discussion that I was having with a friend, which was I think that one of the largest things that stops kids today, or just people today, is this notion that we hear all the time on social media, and we hear it all over in the news, is know your worth, know your worth, know your worth, know your worth. Now, I understand this, but I think that people take it out of context. And I was talking to a girl the other day about it, and I said, that's one of the things that will stop you. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, because as a young kid, you should know your worth, which is minimum wage or less, and be willing to do the things that other people won't be willing to do. And if you get in this mindset of like, I have to know my worth, I'm so valuable at the beginning, you won't be willing to do the things that Jason did to be able to experience the things that Jason is experiencing today. Can you speak on that? Because I don't want to be this, get off my lawn kind of guy, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of things out there that you have to do that sometimes you're not going to get the return on investment immediately. You're not going to get paid what you think you should right away. But those are the people that later on have the stories that, like the Jasons of the world, that I'm interviewing and talking about mastering your millions.
Yeah, I guess one good example is the story of there's a type of bamboo that's particularly indigenous to Japan, and it grows like a few inches the first 5 years. But then in the 6th year, it grows something to like 40 feet. Well, in the first 5 years, it's developing a root system, right? So it can support this massive growth in that year. It's similar to us in that we have got to pay our dues. We've got to spend some time having an education. One of the problems that kids have, and it's ingrained in us, it's not, I don't know that it's forced upon us. However, Kelly, you want a Big Mac and fries? How long is it going to take you to get it? Right? You go order it, and if it's 3 minutes instead of 2, you get upset. We have this instant gratification mentality in this country that really, that's not the way things work, right? Things have got to percolate, things have got to mature, and then you start to have some growth, right? Yet during that time, you still got to be putting in the work. That's where I think you're at. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I wanted to know from your perspective too, as far as like, how can a person stay disciplined in those things? Because there are so many shining objects in today's society. Like for me growing up, it was the Sears catalog right around Christmas time. That was the shiny thing. But now we're inundated with so many things. How can a person keep themselves, like every time I see you, Jason, you're calm. Every time. You just stayed calm, and you just said who you interviewed today and what she did on your podcast, Master Your Millions, which if you're not listening to it, you need to listen to his podcast. It's absolutely phenomenal. But how do you stay in that pocket of just, it's like Jason is always peaceful. How do you stay there?
It's been beat into me. I don't know. Having 6 kids and things running around and losing your brain. I mean, the fourth child is the one where you really start to lose your mind, right? Because when you have 3, you can hold one hand and wife can hold one hand and maybe one in between you. But when you start having a little bit more than that, it just goes crazy. So I really don't have a good answer there, Kelly, other than there's been times when I've been out of control or it felt like the whole world was ending, and just simply doing what. And, well, let me tell you, I watched, and I don't do this very often, okay? I watched this movie. It's called Saving Private Ryan. My dad had come to visit, and he had heard about it, right? He goes, I want to watch it. And so I said, okay, well, I usually don't watch those types of movies, but I'll watch it with you, Dad. And that opening scene is intense.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I was bugged by it. And like, we watched it, we went to bed. I didn't sleep very good because it was so graphic and everything. And the next day, I'm an early riser, so my dad, and I talking to him, I said, Dad, how was that movie? He says, that's not even close to the real thing. I said, what do you mean? He says, no, you don't understand. I said, well, how did you do it? He says, sometimes when there's bombs going off and people getting killed left and right around, he says, the only thing you can do is focus on the next breath. You just focus on breathing. I'm gonna take one more breath. I'm gonna survive one more breath. Now, I've never been in that situation, right?
Yeah.
However, sometimes when things are going so crazy, you focus on, okay, I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna take care of myself, and then focus on gratitude. That I'm grateful for what I do have, right? And rely back on things. Another thing Dad said, he says, "There's no atheist in a foxhole," and he also said, when guys got wounded, they always cried for their mom or their wife. And it doesn't matter how macho they were or anything else, right? When it boils down to what were they considering, what their most treasured relationships were. So in saying we should stay calm, I'm not sure I have a great answer for you. Other than you do what you got to do, right? Dad also said you do your duty. And so my duty is to take care of my wife and my kids. And I'm going to do that. Come hell or high water. Oops, I swore. Anyway,
it's amazing. It's amazing that you just said, like, I don't have a good answer, and then you just dropped a bomb on us. You know, you drop wisdom, and this is why I like to hang out with you, and that's why I was saying at the beginning of the show that I'm so honored to be able to have you as a friend, because when I have you as a friend, I don't have to be good at what you're good at, and you are the best at what you do. With your research resulting in over 28 papers being published and 5 patents that are now we're enjoying, like us, all of us, anyone out there listening, anybody watching, you're all benefiting from with the nanotechnology that Jason helped to be able to create. Can you talk about some of that technology and the patents that you did? And because you hear about these things, but generally you don't get a chance to be able to talk with someone who really, I mean, you have really changed the foundation of what is happening in our society today.
So originally there was this grant put out by DARPA. If you understand how light refracts and diffracts, there was a predicted barrier to how small computers could get, right? Because what they do is they like put a mask and then they shine light down on a polymer, and then they etch that away, and that etches the copper underneath. And so you're making the circuit board that's in your computer or your phone or whatever. Well, those gaps that the light is shining through can only get so small. Then the light diffracts out, and it's not uniform. And so you can't print a circuit board so small. So they want to say, how can we overcome this? And Purdue and Princeton won the right to take a look at it, right? They funded them. And so I was a part of the group at Purdue, and what we looked at and said, okay, if you look around us, there's two ways things are done. They're either take something big like what Michelangelo did with a big piece of marble, and he chiseled out David, right? And David's left behind. That's where it is. Well, that's analogous to how we're making computer chips at the time. And for the most part, a lot of them how they are now. Well, another way is we take small bricks and we put them together and we build a house or a building, right? And so we said, okay, let's take a look and see, is there fundamental physical and chemical properties that cause things to assemble in a way that nature likes to be? And can we then direct that or take advantage of that and make structures that are close to 1,000 times on the nano scale, right? Because the micro scale is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. The nano scale is 1/1,000,000,000th of a meter. And on that scale, manipulate it in such a way. And so what we did at Purdue, we actually were able to have a circuit, and there was another group that was making these nano particles. They're made out of gold, right? And could we make them assemble in such a way that we could measure the resistance of a molecule? Can we start to make resistors and capacitors and have them assemble simply the way nature wants to do? And that's really at the heart of what we were doing. We had a review like three years into it. Sorry to say this, but Princeton did get to continue. We did. I'm taking a shot at Princeton. I'm sorry. But we were pretty proud of that. You know, we got reviewed. The big wigs came in and showed what we were doing. And there's a lot of people out there that have seen, there's a picture that was taken of these particles, and it says Intel. That was part of our group. I was one of the physicists in our group, right? But that was what we're doing. So now you're starting to understand that was the building blocks and thinking of what can you do on a nano scale. It was cool. I was there in Indiana. I hadn't been back to Indiana a long time ago. I went to visit a mutual friend of ours, James Dixon. And so I cruised over to Lafayette to see what's going. And they have a nanotechnology building there that I think was the guy that gave the grant to build was like something like $30 million. And there's 4 stories of this massive building, all basically built on what we did initially, right? And nobody knew what nanotechnology was then, but sure do now. It's kind of cool.
So talk to us about the shift, because I mean, most people aren't going to shift from nanotechnology into wealth building and wealth conservation, and also the growing of wealth. And I think the cool thing is with your podcast, Master Your Millions, the cool thing with you is there's a lot of people who talk about that part of it as far as like, oh, once you have it, then you're doing this. But I've seen you, and you're actually teaching people how to get it and then how to master it. So talk to us about the beginning of that, though, Jason. Like, how was that transition? Because those aren't parallel universes. Those are pretty much skew planes that you're working with.
I don't necessarily see it that way, right? I get a kick out of solving problems. And it's just simply, are you solving a way to make a certain molecule, or are you solving a way to make a capacitor on the nanoscale, or are you solving a problem of helping people become wealthy? It's still a problem, right? And so that's where I think at the heart of it, I get the kick out of solving problems. And the recognition of a problem is really the beginning of the biggest advances in science and everything that we have. Recognizing that you have a problem, your attitude, or where you're at, or your entitlement mentality, recognizing the problem is the beginning of the solution. So in my mind, it's not a whole huge shift. However, I learned a couple of things about finances. Again, back to this professor said, if you're so rich, why aren't you, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Causing me to really be, man, why, how dare you say that? Started to research, started doing read. I mean, read the greats, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Think and Grow Rich, 3 Feet from Gold, go on and on and on. There's another one called Becoming Your Own Banker that really changed my world to start saying, okay, let's take a look at this. And so having been at a postdoc and as a Ph.D. student, there's times when the professor's out of town, right? They're gone. In fact, at Purdue, my professor, Kubiak, he was starting to get a lot of notoriety because we were publishing, right? We were publishing a lot of stuff, and it was cutting edge stuff. And people were saying, oh, come here, come there, present. So I'd be making these slides back. That's the overheads, right? And he'd take them, so Jason, I need this. So I'd make the slides, and he'd go to Australia, right? And lecture on my research. He'd present my research to other people. Well, who's left behind? Someone's got to teach his class. So I was teaching classes, graduate level classes and things, and I realized, man, when you teach it, you learn it the best. You know it in and out. So as I was learning about how to build wealth, I started to say, I want to learn to teach it. I'm going to teach it in a roundabout, selfish way, saying, I'm going to know the best way to do it for me and for my family. So that was kind of the beginning of the transition, and started to get a real kick out of it. And I don't have to smell chemicals as much.
What was the paradigm shift as far as in the wealth part? Was it the Becoming Your Own Banker? It was Nash, the book that you're talking about. And if you haven't got a chance to be able to check that out, you should read it. It's very interesting. I mean, it's unbelievable the things that are in plain sight that most people don't understand and most people aren't privy to, right? But what was the paradigm shift for you? With the wealth and where it really started to, where the gear, I think of it like I grew up on cars, and my pop was a mechanic, and he got me a '63 Impala when I was in 11th grade, my summer year, and I always think about it as like putting the transmission in neutral. Then once you pop it into drive or pop it into reverse, it catches. You could rev the engine as much as you want, but once it catches, that's where you really make traction. What was that paradigm shift in the wealth building for you?
So I had started on this journey learning about money and how to grow it. Had the realization with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what had happened with my dad. And then I read Becoming Your Own Banker. And the thing that I realized is in that book, he uses the financing of 2 depreciating assets. It's like, well, what about financing appreciating assets? And that's married, if you will, with my dad. He's done a lot with real estate, right? I learned to drive a manual transmission truck because Dad said, we were pouring concrete, we were building a mobile home park, and I needed some forms. He says, go get in the truck, go up there. And I was like 12 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. Killed it a couple of times, but was able to go out to another part of the property to get some forms, to bring them back so we could place the forms because the cement truck was coming, right? And he was doing something else. So I'd been around appreciating assets and cash flowing properties my whole life. And so that realization to say, wait a second, I can finance it in such a way that I can not only benefit from the appreciation and the cash flow, I can also benefit from a secondary rate of return by using the techniques in that book.
So me and my friend yesterday, Will, big shout out to him. We were talking about it, and I was saying vocabulary and vernacular inside a culture generally alienates the people not inside the culture, right? And let me explain this, because in the financial world, there's certain trigger words. In the real estate world, there's certain trigger words that when you know them and you understand them and you understand the meanings of them, things start to become very simple. You just used a couple of them in appreciating assets, depreciating assets, cash flow, right? And so help a person that maybe isn't in that realm, okay? And when I say that, because there's so many people, and I counted myself out of arenas because sometimes I didn't understand the words. And I joke about it with Mr. Chris Noggle, and a shout out to him, and I love him. But he used the word arbitrage one time, and it freaked me out. And I was like, man, I don't know what these guys are talking about. And then I went to the University of Google, and I looked it up, and it just said the difference between two numbers. Well, I was just talking with my friend Will, and he works for the city of Los Angeles, and they call it the delta. And so in his world, it's the delta. In the financial world, it's the arbitrage. In Kelly's world, it's the difference between two numbers. If I'm borrowing at 8% and I'm making 16%, my arbitrage or delta is 8%. It's pretty simple math, but it wasn't so simple because the complicated words that were used in the culture of the vernacular and the vocabulary, and that counted me out. What are some of these things? And can you explain the appreciating assets to, if you were talking to Maddox, my son at 11, or Brixton at 14, well, she probably already knows them, but appreciating assets, depreciating assets, and then, for us, some of those terms that way.
Okay. And I'm really glad you asked that question. That's really cool because it goes back to when I was a graduate student in this project, right? There was physicists, chemical engineers, electrical engineers, theoretical engineers, and us chemists. Well, I remember very distinctly, we'd get together and we'd have discussions. What do we need to do next? And there was an outright fight that broke out. We were using different terms coming from a chemist's point of view, coming from a physicist's point of view, and coming from a theoretical engineer point of view. We were talking about the exact same cockeyed thing using different words, right? And that was a huge education for me to realize you've got to speak on other people's terms, or at least know that. So a depreciating asset is something when you buy it and you hold on to it, it's not worth as much. You buy it today, in 10 days it's worth less. In 10 years it's worth less than that. An appreciating asset is you buy it and in 10 years from now it's worth more than what you paid for it. Plain and simple. Everybody knows you buy a car brand new, you drive it off the lot, you lost about 10% of the value right then when you drive a brand new car off the lot. Right? That's a depreciating asset. An appreciating asset could be something like a stock that goes up, although it can come down. A home. I paid $200,000 for my home 20 years ago, and today it's worth $500,000, for example. It has appreciated, going up.
How can a person get into that world when they're thinking, well, this sounds great, Dr. Jason, this sounds amazing, but right now, I mean, I'm buying some depreciating things because what you just said is the apple that I'm going to buy today is going to be worth less in an hour because I'm going to eat that bad boy. The core is going to be left. And they're in that spot. How can they get out of that circle or that cycle? Because once that cycle is broken, it changes things in generations. And this is what you help families to be able to do. So what's the first step for a person?
Take your left hand like this and your right hand like this, and realize that your future self needs to be loved.
Ooh.
Okay? Number one. Now, I'm not being selfish, I'm not being arrogant or anything. Jason has to be in good health. Jason has to be taken care of so I can take care of my wife and my kids, right? So what you have to realize is that future self must be taken care of. And what that means, and this is a mantra I use all the time, a portion of everything you make is yours to keep forever. Now, that's from The Richest Man in Babylon, although the end, forever, is my addition. The Richest Man in Babylon says, a portion of everything you make is yours to keep. I add the word forever, and when you realize that, it needs to stay with me, my family, my grandchildren. I found out just a few weeks ago, for the first time, I'm going to have a grandchild in December. But I'll tell you what, I've been planning for that grandchild through finances and things for 15 years. That grandchild already has a gift from me that's already going to bless their lives later in the time for the fact that a portion of everything I make is mine to keep forever. So again, loving yourself, I think, is the beginning to get out of that. Say, I'm going to it doesn't matter how much it is, it's got to be done. Whether you put $1 away a day or $20 a month or whatever, it doesn't matter in the beginning how much it is. It just simply has to be done.
What about, Jason, the one thing that eludes a person who has a little bit more generational support? And when I say this, what I'm talking about is there's so many times where a person will work their butts off. They'll go to the ends of the earth to make sure that their family is taken care of. And when I say that, I live in this realm too. And growing up the way that I did, I wanted to make sure that my kids had every single thing that they could possibly, want, or some of the things they didn't even know that they wanted. But then my wife said to me the other day, she was like, but then sometimes they will lose out on the one thing that helped her and I to be able to get that, or you and Tanya to be able to get that, which is the ability to figure stuff out. And when I say that, like, most of the time as parents or as grandparents, we want to make sure that we almost mow the lawn for the kids before they get there. So we mow down all the weeds so they have a little easier time than we did. That's just normal stuff. How do you create the figure out gene when they're not having to do it? Because for you, I know that you built your wealth, you built your fortune because you had to. There was nobody else that was doing it for you. How do you continue on and keep that cycle going of the figure outable gene?
So when we talked earlier about the difference between being rich and wealthy, part of that wealthy, in my opinion, is a culture in the family, right? And part of that culture is you need to get together, you need to tell the stories, right? This is how we got where we're at. This is what we came through. Because the next generation doesn't appreciate that hard work. And that's why it's usually, from 3 generations from shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve. You've heard that. It's for the fact that you haven't passed on that culture to say, this is where it came from. You need to appreciate that. And they need to hear the story over and over and over again. You talk about your pops and all the stories that he tells you and the amazing wisdom that he passed on. Well, you're doing it for your son, and you're telling, this is what my dad told me, and this is what, and so he's going to naturally come up to that and already have a feeling like, okay, this is kind of what the Cardenas do, and this is kind of how we approach things. Well, if the figure out gene is being passed on like that, that's one way to do it, right? To be sharing of that, it has to be intentional. When I'm advising families and stuff, I'm saying, all right, number one, we're not going on a vacation. We're going on a business trip. It needs to be a business trip, so it's tax deductible, right? But on this business trip, right? Vacation is a bad word, but when we're on this business trip, there's a time when we gather in mom and dad's bedroom or hotel room, and we have a discussion. We talk about the culture. We talk about where the family's been. We tell the stories again. I mean, Brixton was young enough that she really doesn't remember my grandma. She's my mother, actually, her grandma. So I need to tell her about her, right? And then she starts to say, okay, this is where I came from. This is where I'm going. This is what I can do. So that's where the figure out gene for me comes from, intentionally telling stories and sharing with that. Yes, I'm with you. Let them fail. Let them, they want to do a lemonade stand. From the very beginning, I said, okay, this is your lemonade stand. Where's your raw materials? So they go out and sell all this lemonade, right? And they come back and say, okay, well, where'd you get your raw materials? Where'd you get your bottles of lemonade, right? Your 2-liter bottles. Well, I just took them from downstairs in the basement. I said, well, that needs to be replaced. Here, we need to take out of your earnings this. We need to do that, right? And so then they get done. It's like, man, I didn't make as much as I thought. I says, yeah, you're right. However, you made something. Good job. Go do it again. Figure out how to make it bigger. So they had to do it on their own.
Jason, what are some of the structures that a person can get in place or put in place for when they do start to see financial gain and they do start to see wealth, because I think a lot of times people are surprised by their success. I see so many people that will open businesses. I saw this with, around, where they would open a second location because they were surprised that the first one worked, as opposed to planning and putting in place the structures and systems that will sustain in the event that it does grow to a second location. How can you apply that in the wealth aspect? And how can a person that maybe doesn't have the millions right now prepare themselves so when they do have it, that they're able to keep it?
Number one is education. Find someone who's getting the results that you want and master what they do. Right? And so that's where some of my biggest kick is simply teaching people how to do it. Right? I'm not saying that I have the results that everybody wants. However, I can show them people and say, this is how they're doing it. Right? I'm constantly reading and attempting to learn more. So I want to be able to teach other people that. So you find someone, be willing to go and say, hey, I want to learn from you. You don't go and ask, like, here, give it to me, but go give first and then see how they mentor you. I don't know, am I answering the right question there, or did I go off on a tangent?
No, it's perfect, man. I mean, you say that you don't answer a question, but you're nailing them and just dropping wisdom bombs on us the whole time.
Oh, thanks. You're kind.
So talk to me too, Jason. Talk to me about this too, because most of the time, I joked at a financial convention one time, and it was an insurance one, and you understand that world. It was the high cash value life insurance that you're talking about as far as being your own banker. And I joked with the crew and I said, well, I've got a insurance policy. And they were like, what's it for? And I said, it's for 50% of your income in perpetuity, 50% of your net worth, 30% of your income in perpetuity, and your mental health. And everyone was like, I'll sign up today. Where is it at? How much is the premium? And I paused and just waited. And then I said, stay married. And then the room just like went silent. And then they got it. They understood. How important is it with wealth building to make sure that the family's in place?
Well, I believe the family is the number one tool to building wealth. You've heard the old saying that when the grandpa died, he bought the farm. When they have right type of insurance, right, money comes into it that the farm doesn't need to be split up or the South 40 needs to be sold to keep the whole farm and keeping it going, whether that's a farm or a business, right? Leveraging life insurance. How old's your parents? They still around?
No, so they were 62 and 68 when they passed.
So they passed. Okay, let's say they were still alive and they're 62,
Mm-hmm.
right? One of the best things that you could do was buy a life insurance policy on them and leverage that, right? Because the big win sometimes, the real leverage is the death benefit. The death benefit from a life insurance policy is the single biggest tax advantage in the whole tax code. You can go through the 80,000 plus pages and you can talk to, people that advise high net worth people. The best advantage and the best benefit of the whole tax code is the death benefit, right? So that's one of the things I teach. Say, you need to insure your parents right now. In fact, I teach my kids, I said, don't invest or put money in a 401k or Roth or anything like that. Buy a life insurance policy on me. When it's time for you to have some passive income when you get older, it's statistically, I'm going to pass and you're going to get a whole bunch of income tax-free money come to you that's just like poof, have a ton of money, right? So the family has to be intact to be able to do that. The love with mom and dad and the grandparents and the grandchildren, that's how you build wealth. You might even remember, and Paris Hilton was talked about that she was a trust baby, right? She was worth millions upon millions of dollars, basically the day she was born. Well, why is that? For the fact that in order for the family wealth to continue, you need to guarantee that's going to continue, and you do that using life insurance. And so, when she was born, they bought a huge life insurance policy. By the time she was 18, she was worth millions of dollars because there was tons of cash value there, right? High cash value. So then she started getting access to it and doing some crazy things. However, when she passes, that wealth will transfer to the next generation through trusts, and it's protected from the IRS. It's not dispersed, right? It's kept together.
Jason, I think one of the coolest things too was you came to an event called the Vibe Room, which if you haven't been to the Vibe Room, I believe you should come. Although Jason was mad at me, and he sent me a message afterwards. He was like, "Man, you know, it was tough," and I respected it. I thought that it was so cool. You brought your 14-year-old daughter, who I absolutely love. Brixton is amazing, and there was some language in the place that I have to take ownership of. But you're very, very, very sensitive to this, and not just sensitive, but you're aware of this. And even to your point earlier, where you were saying, you know, Saving Private Ryan, where you're not watching movies like that, or listening to music like that, or being around people who are using, profanity. How can you exist in today's society with the type of foul language that there is? How can you do that? And why is it so important for you and for your family?
When I was a senior in high school, Dad, I was walking down the hall, and I had taken the ASVAB test, and I guess I scored like off the charts. There was a full bird colonel and a major that saw me, and I don't know how they knew me. They just said, "Henderson?" But of course I responded to the uniform. I said, "Yes, sir. Come in here." And I was like, I go in there, and they sat me down and said, "Look, where do you want to go to school? What do you want to do? We can guarantee you anything you want. You just need to enlist." Right? I had scored so high on this test. I said, "You want to go be on the nuclear subs? You want to do this? Whatever. It's yours." And of course I thought about it, but yet I went home and talked to Dad, and Dad said, "I went to war so you don't have to. That was one of the purposes I went to war, so you wouldn't have to go to war." And what I learned from that is Dad stood between me and harm. Okay? And I have the feeling that I need to forever stand between, in particular, my daughters and harm. I want to do the same thing for my sons. And I don't care how much success, how much money I make, a notoriety, it's not going to compensate for me being a failure in my own home. For me not standing in between my kids and harm. And so whatever that harm is, I'm willing to stand in between that. We were at another event, both of us at the Secret Knock, and that was cool too. But there was a part during that, there was someone that was talking some pretty adult things, right? And I stood up and I took Brixton out. We went out on the street and took a walk. I held her hand, and we walked. It was beautiful, Kelly. We walked hand in hand. We just talked about it. Says, that's not what we want to do. We don't want to put those kind of ideas in our head, because there's other ideas that are going to be much more fruitful for us than those. So I don't know, other than that, that's a deep-seated thing in me. I will forever stand between my kids and Harmway and my wife. I'm going to stand, if there's bullets coming, it's going to hit me first. There's been others that have done that for me, right? Let me tell you a story, a really cool story, Kelly. So on Anzio Beachhead was the whole idea is they were going to get to Rome and take Rome. And my dad was on there, and there's in about a 2 mile by 4 miles area on that beachhead, there's a little over 50,000 guys that lost their lives. That happened a little bit before D-Day. Well, on one night, my dad was ordered to go out on a reconnaissance mission. And they're out in the dark and everything, and all of a sudden the machine gun opens fire and they drop to the ground. Now the curvature of the road was such that the machine gun would never hit them as long as they stayed low, because it would just ricochet off the top of the road. Well, it was soon to be light, and my dad was the commander, and he turned to his sergeant. He says, "We've got to get out of here, we're dead men." He says, "Now what we're going to do is when I feel it's right, I'm going to pinch you. You pinch the next guy, pass it down, and run, stay low." He felt like it was right. He pinched Sergeant Jackowitz and took off running. Jack was from Pennsylvania. I believe he was Italian or Polish. I don't remember what he's from. Anyway, he was faster than Dad. And at one point, the machine gun opened fire and hit Jack Woods was hit. And the force of that bullet hit it came into Dad, and they both fell down. And Jack Woods died right there on my dad's legs. He had been his sergeant for a long time in his unit, his platoon. Dad was the platoon commander, and that guy stood between a gun and my dad. Right? His body was that thing, and so I want to do that for my kids, right? I want to be that person. I want to stand between harm's way and them, and to give them an opportunity to enjoy and have the things that they want. I mean, even if it's something silly like an Oilers helmet that's sitting behind.
That's one of that's an appreciating asset right there. That's an appreciating one. I that's the way I feel about it.
Oh, good.
It's amazing, Jason, and that's the reason why not only I admire you, I'm inspired by you, but again, at the beginning of the show when I talked about like all the things that you do is amazing, but the person that you are is more important to me. And I see the way that you look at Brixton. I see the way that you look at Tanya. And even when you were talking about coming to the Vibe Room the next time, like on July 26th is the next Vibe Room in Orem, and you were like, we're trying to figure it out because I really want a date night with my wife. And, you were like, I'm trying to figure this out and figure that out. And it's just so cool because you're always constantly, even when I try and I'm not trying to test you on it, but I'll just ask you when nobody's listening, and your family is always first. And for me, it's no surprise that you have been as successful in those areas, in the different areas as you have in the scientific area, in the wealth building area, in your relationships, because you put your family first and then everything else falls in line. And I just think that it's absolutely phenomenal. It's very, very inspirational, man. I started the podcast because of my kids, Maddox and McKenna. Maddox is 11 years old, marches the beat of his own drum. McKenna is a little actress and as sarcastic as they come, with one of the greatest personalities that I've ever met and the biggest heart. And I wanted to take iconic people like yourself, and I wanted to show them that there's no idols in life to worship, only icons to be inspired by. So what advice would you have for Maddox and McKenna? And if you could use both their names, it would be awesome.
So Maddox and McKenna, number one, you have phenomenal pops. It's more than a father. He's pops, right? Love him every single day. There will come a day when pops is not going to be around, right? And what you're going to have is the memories that you had with him. So that would be number one, is simply be grateful for what you have in the dad that you have. And when you are in a state of gratitude, you're so much easier to learn the lessons of life that are the most valuable. I'd also say to be grateful that you can go out on the beach with your dad occasionally. Because I know you go out there on the beach and you think that's a place, that's your inspirational area, right? Mm-hmm. I would encourage you to go out there and sit next to him. You don't need to talk. Sometimes you go out there and look and see, oh yeah, today's the 27th and he's reading, the 27th chapter of Proverbs. Well, read it too. Do what he does and things will be good.
Jason, you have been phenomenal, man. It's great for me because not only do I get to have you on this episode, I want to have you on more. I want to talk more and more about this wealth building and being able to master your millions. If you're not listening to the podcast right now, as far as master your millions, you need to go and do that. If you haven't subscribed to our channel on YouTube and you're watching this right now, subscribe immediately. Smash the button. Smash it with all of your might, as hard as you possibly can. But Jason, it's cool for me because not only the episodes, but also just having you in my life. We're going to be spending time in Atlanta with the Absolute Motivation Tour. We're going to be doing that. Obviously, I'm going to see you at Secret Knock. I'm going to see you at Prosperity Camp. And you just aren't going to be able to get rid of me. And I just want to tell you, your family, and I'm naming Brixton in this because she is just such a cool individual and just such a light. And the thing, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell the quick story about Brixton. When we were at Secret Knock, I was taking pictures with all the people. I said, it's 250 people. And I said, hey, if you want to get your picture on stage, I'll take your picture. I'll sit here and I'll take pictures with every single person. Brixton was standing there. And as the people walked up, I looked at her and I said, hey, can you just take the cameras? And can you take the picture? She didn't even hesitate. She's only 14 years old. She could have said, no, I'm going to go get lunch. What do you mean? Do I get all the stuff? And she was just like, no, what's the angle? And she'd bam, bam, bam. And then after 5 people, she was asking the second person in line, give me your phone, give me your phone, give me your phone. Get ready. Make sure you're set this way. And then she was directing it at 14 years old. That's the type of legacy that you're leaving. And Jason, my hat's off to you, man. You're an absolute inspiration and incredible human being.
Thank you very much. I need to add something here since we're talking about Brixton. At the Vibe Room last time, you said something really significant. And yes, the Vibe is coming up again here in Orem. Yes, I plan on being there. And everybody that's listening to this and subscribe, beg, borrow, steal to get there, folks. Get there. It really is what it says. The Vibe Room, there's good, for the most part, good stuff, right? No, it's awesome. But one of the things you said is your kids are not going to remember what you tell them. They're going to remember what you show them. And so on the way home, as we're talking about it, I simply said, Brixton, what have I shown you? And she hesitated for a minute. She goes, you've shown me how I should be treated. Right? Because she says, I see how you treat mom, and I know that that's the way I deserve to be treated. So kudos to you. I mean, Brixton thinks you walk on water, Kelly. So, I mean, she thinks you, and you do. You know, you have such a great, refreshing outlook on life. Man, I hope and pray for you to be wildly successful in everything you put your hand to. And yes, I want to be there on the front row when you speak to a stadium of 100,000 people, which I know is one of your goals. I want to be there, dude. You got to let me in on that.
Oh, of course, man. Well, I really appreciate it, and I can't wait for the second episode. A second, third, and fourth as we go along. But what I want to tell you all out there, make sure that you check out the sponsors. You click the links, you do all the things. We have a new person in our family, which is Poppington Popcorn. It's Maddox's favorite type of food, and when I said it before, like everything else is just basic unless it's Poppington's. That's what Maddox said to me. Check out Mr. Chris Nagel. Check out Finley Volvo Cars of Las Vegas, because it's not about the transaction, it's about the relationship. That's what Jim DiGiulio taught me. So Jason, you're incredible. I love you so much, man, and I cannot wait to have you on another show. And you are officially off the hot seat.